Let me read to you a passage from the 20th chapter of St. John's Gospel, verses 24 to 29. It's the Gospel for the feast of St. Thomas the Apostle on July the 3rd. St. John writes, "Now Thomas, called Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, 'We have seen the Lord.' But he said to them, 'Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it.' A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, 'Peace be with you.' Then he said to Thomas, 'Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe.' Thomas said to him, 'My Lord and my God.' Then Jesus told him, 'Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." That's from John chapter 20, verse 24 to 29, for the feast of St. Thomas the Apostle on July the 3rd. We are led to think of belief. William Kingdon Clifford, who lived from 1845 to 1879, was an English geometer. His field was especially geometry. He was a mathematician and he was a philosopher. Among other things, building on the work of Grassmann, he introduced what is now termed geometric algebra. He died a couple of months before John Henry Newman was made a cardinal, which is to say some 9 years after the publication of Newman's great work on religious belief, A Grammar of Assent. While he had nothing personally to do with Newman, Clifford certainly represented the mindset that Newman combated. He presented religious skepticism as a moral imperative. When 31, he delivered his paper, The Ethics of Belief, 1876, to the English Metaphysical Society, of which he was a member. Arguing that it was immoral to believe things for which one lacks evidence, his article contains the famous principle that it is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. This article on belief is now well known as putting the case for the immorality of religious belief. He wrote that if a man holding a belief which he was taught in childhood or persuaded of afterwards keeps down and pushes away any doubts which arise about it in his mind, purposely avoids the reading of books and the company of men that call in question or discuss it, and regards as impious those questions which cannot easily be asked without disturbing it, the life of that man is one long sin against mankind. Clifford and his similarly non-believing wife are buried in London's Highgate Cemetery, just north of the grave of Karl Marx. In reading his article, which is commonly regarded as emblematic of modern agnosticism, we notice among other things that he writes this: "We may go beyond experience by assuming that what we do not know is like what we do know, or in other words, we may add to our experience on the assumption of a uniformity in nature." He concludes that no evidence, therefore, can justify us in believing the truth of a statement which is contrary to or outside of the uniformity of nature. Now this is an assumption, one similar to the assumptions involved earlier in David Hume's attack on the possibility of miracles. Here, though, I do not propose to critique Clifford. I just want to illustrate in his case, the contemporary rejection of the supernatural. One result of the firm acceptance of the assumption that all must be uniform with nature is that if any proposition is not, such as the rising from the dead of Jesus Christ, then of course the one proposing it has been duped in some way. It is deemed as certainly not a truth. Now, arising from the dead is not uniform with nature, because in our experience people never rise from the dead. Death is a terrible and final fact. Despite this, though, many people saw the living Jesus risen from the dead and in the flesh, though glorious. The fact was tested empirically, we may say. People touched, felt, saw, and heard him. The risen Jesus was empirically measured. The fact was subjected to the observation of the senses. If the reply to this is that, well, they were duped, how then would anything of this kind, arising from the dead of an exceptionally good man who predicted the fact, be tested empirically? Must we have the whole world of every generation touch, see, and feel the risen Jesus? That is absurd. Today we think of St. Thomas the Apostle. There are several things we can think of in Thomas, and one of them is his uncannily contemporary demand for empirical evidence that is in accord with the conformity of nature. As we read, now Thomas, called Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it." He wanted to measure the physical fact. Only then would he believe. Well, he got what he bargained for. As we read, a week later his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." There is this about Thomas, though. When Christ gave him the tangible proof he insisted on, Thomas rose to a magnificent belief. Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." In his faith, Thomas showed great moral disposition. This is the point. To accept the incarnate Son of God and his unique claims, more is required than mere evidence, let alone evidence that is in mere conformity with the physical world. What is needed is a moral disposition and readiness to accept what will actually be life-changing. The encounter with the risen Jesus gave to Thomas's life a new and special spring, as it did for the rest of the apostles. Thomas went on to a life of unwearied witness to Jesus to the ends of the earth. His tomb is venerated in India. He brought the good news that death is now the door to a wondrous life, if we but live in Jesus Christ by faith and baptism. That is the kingdom.